Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm your host, Tapon. In this episode, I talk with Gary Arndt, who lives in Minneapolis. Gary Arndt is the creator of everythingeverywhere.com. He is a super well-known traveler. In this case, he doesn't have to travel to see any action. George Floyd was murdered in his city. As of today, May 30th, there are riots and protests all across the United States. And while we're talking, there's all sorts of chaos that's happening in the background just outside his apartment window. And you can actually hear the sounds of sirens, etc., and honking horns. It's chaos, helicopters. He's in the middle of a very exciting place for all the wrong reasons. I really hope everybody has a brain and doesn't use George Floyd's senseless death as a reason to do even more senseless acts of violence and destruction right in the middle of the corona apocalypse. This is really the last thing we really need. It's so incredibly stupid, and it makes me sad for our species and makes us look like a bunch of ridiculous primates with no frontal lobe.
Welcome to the WanderLearn podcast. I'm your host, Tapon. In this episode, I have Gary Arndt back. And Gary, there's a story that I saw on your Instagram. And by the way, we're recording this on May 29th. And there's just been riots in Minnesota. And my favorite story I thought we could start off with is when you talked to some Somalis. Can you tell us about that, Somalis in Minnesota?
So I was walking, I got off the main street, and this car pulls up to me. And there are 4 young women in it, all Somali. Head coverings on. They, sir, can we ask you a really weird question? And I'm like, it's a really weird time, so sure. So they were from the town of Wilmer, Minnesota, which is a smaller community. I want to say it's like, an hour, 90 minutes out of the Twin Cities. It's kind of a farming town. And they had come into the Twin Cities so one of the girls could do her interview for college. And they got stuck in Minneapolis when all this stuff was going on, and they didn't have much gas in their car, and all the gas stations are shut. You can't buy gas. You can't get food right now. And they didn't know how to get the hell out. And the street that they were on to normally get out of here would take them right through the heart of everything. And so I just said, well, go ahead, take a right, and that will take you far away in the opposite direction of everything. You should find some gas stations that are open in the next town over, which is not far. It's only a few miles away. Just stay on that road, and it'll eventually take you to this highway, and that'll get you out. But they were terrified, and I told them, you know what's happening here, right? And they go, yes, we want to get the hell out of here.
Right.
But yeah, there's a sizable Somali population in Minnesota generally, and particularly where I live.
The irony of this whole thing is just that, we associate Somalia with, war and fighting and chaos and danger. And here they came all the way out to sleepy Minnesota to kind of escape home.
I was thinking about that today because, I got to wonder, it's we came all the way over here for this.
Exactly.
Or, the other thing that some of them could be thinking is, oh, this is nothing.
Right.
Because I've talked to some of the local Somalis. And, I said, well, I've been to parts of Africa. I haven't been to Somalia. And I'd say, well, where are you from in Somalia? And the most common answer is Mogadishu or in that area. So I think that they can do this standing on their head.
I think it's interesting that you, the world traveler who's been to all sorts of places, all sorts of crazy situations, that probably the craziest situation you've ever had is currently right now in your hometown.
This is probably the second craziest. So 2010, I was in Bangkok when the red shirt protests were going on. And one day, so there were about 100,000 protesters in Bangkok. And one day they decided they were going to protest at the prime minister's house, which happened to be 2 blocks away from where I was staying. So I'm like, okay, I got to photograph this. So I head out. I'm a white guy with a big camera. And there's all these international news agencies, and they got helmets on and armbands saying media and all this stuff. And I'm just a dude with a camera. And I'm stuck between several thousand very angry protesters and several hundred cops in full-blown riot gear. And I was not as scared I won't. I wasn't that scared because I knew I wasn't a part of it, and everyone knew I wasn't a part of it because I wasn't Thai, and so I wasn't too concerned about my safety. Last night, there was a small, very loud crowd of young men that seemed, if they weren't drunk, they were certainly acting as if they were drunk. I was probably more scared with that, which is why I headed off the side street to get off the main street, how I ran into these girls. And very close to where I met these women, there was a towing company. So they had their garage and their lot. And there were 3 very large guys standing out in front with the garage door open. They had placed cement, those kind of cement blocks that you see like when they do construction. They're like, that you'd put up. So that was ringing their business. They had a bulldozer in their driveway with the blade up. And they were basically sitting out here as kind of a, don't screw with us. There were so many, this was at, 9:30, 10 last night, businesses that were scrambling to cut plywood to get it to cover up all their windows. And even in a couple cases, it didn't help. The Apple store got hit twice in the last 2 nights, which lets you know that I think a lot of this, there's a lot of legitimate anger that's going on in this community. And then there are some people that are using this as an excuse to just steal.
Yeah, I mean, that's
in every time you have something like this, that kind of happens.
Yeah, totally. And what surprised you the most? I mean, you had these great Instagram stories, and I encourage everybody to go to your Instagram. Can you tell everybody your Instagram handle? It's Everything Everywhere?
Yeah, just Everything Everywhere. And you'll see one of my highlights where I stored the stories. It just says Minneapolis 2020, so you can see them all there. And I'll probably be posting more tomorrow. One of the things I did not see mentioned on the news is that there were so many people who were out walking around Lake Street, which is the main area where all this is happening, that had brooms and garbage bags, and they were just cleaning up. They were cleaning up the broken glass. They were just doing everything. And there were actually more people there to clean than there was stuff to clean up. And it kind of reminded me after 9/11 in New York, you had so many people that lined up to give blood, and there just weren't many people that needed blood because there were very few people that were injured. Most people just died. And here too, you had more people willing to clean than there was, broken glass because it got cleaned up pretty quick. There was a lot of graffiti. Thankfully, most of it, but not all, most of it was scrawled on the plywood that companies had set up over the windows, which is good because when they take down the plywood, then the graffiti will go with it at least. So that was kind of a nice Minnesota touch. I think they were thinking of other people.
Right, exactly.
And
what about George Floyd? I mean, what is his? What have you learned about the man who died?
He, one of his best friends was an NBA player. He was from Houston, not from Minnesota originally. He moved up here. I think he got a trucking job. It's not like sometimes you see the people who are victims of this and you learn more about him and they had this long criminal past. I think he had some brushes with the law, but nothing major. Everyone who knows him seems like he was a really good guy. And even what he was accused of, if true, just for the sake of argument, certainly didn't warrant anything that was done to him like this.
Do you think that the cop that did it to him, I mean, he just honestly really, I mean, he didn't intend to kill him. I guess he was probably just as surprised, I'm guessing, but was he, or do you think he just had this, anger in him that he really wanted to kill George Floyd?
I don't think I'm sure he didn't try to kill him, but he was certainly... One of the big problems, I think, is that over the last 50 years, since the start of the war on drugs, and this accelerated at the end of the Cold War, is that police in the United States have become militarized, that they view themselves as part of the military. And what happened in Minneapolis last year is that the mayor told the police department they were to stop doing warrior training. And what warrior training is that police basically train as if they were a military unit. Well, the problem is, even though they both wear uniforms and have guns, what military units do are very different than what police do. Police are public servants. They're peacekeepers. officers of the law. It's a very different job than being a soldier, where you're dealing with enemy combatants. And police now view the public as enemy combatants, that they're going out and they got to watch out for themselves because everyone's out to get them. And so they escalate situations, from 0 to 100, and they always go for the most extreme option because they feel that, they're a threat to themselves or to someone else. And we've seen it time after time again in New York, where they choked that guy to death for selling a loose cigarette. And things like this has happened, or they're very quick to shoot. And it's also things into doing no-knock warrants. I don't know if you've heard the term swatting.
No.
So I could, let's say, call the police where you live and say, hey, Francis Tapon, he's holding his wife hostage with a gun. And then they'll come in with the SWAT team, and there's a 5 to 10% chance that they'll shoot you. Right? So I could murder you by police by sending in an anonymous request.
I've heard actually, now as you say, yes. They did this.
The only reason that could possibly work is because people know in advance that the police are going to overreact. And to be sure, there are cases, if you have an active shooter or a hostage or something like that, where you do need a SWAT team or you do need specialists to come in, and it's an armed situation. But most situations are not like that. And it's gotten to a point where people now expect police to act in such a manner that they're, of course, being in anticipation of this, may get violent beforehand, and it's kind of spiraled out of control. So I think what you really need is sort of a complete restructuring of how policing is done in America. Because this warrior notion and this notion that they're part of the military has really seeped in over the last several decades. There is a police force in Arizona. I forget where it is. So when the Cold War ended, a lot of the excess surplus military gear was given to police departments. So there are literally police departments in America with tanks, with armored personnel carriers, and this one in Arizona has a belt-fed 50 caliber machine gun. Now, what the fuck do you do with a belt-fed 50 cal? There's only one thing that's used for, right? And that's murdering large numbers of people. There is no situation, none, for which a police force would ever need a weapon like that. If you could create a situation where they would need it, then you bring in the National Guard or the military, right? And they are the belt-fed machine gun people, not the cops. But they just want all this military gear, and it's developed this sort of ethos. And to go back to what I originally said, so when the mayor of Minneapolis said the police can no longer do warrior training, the police union said, F you, we're going to keep doing it. And that, I think, in a microcosm, was part of the attitude of the police in Minneapolis. It's like, what are you going to do? We're the cops. You know?
Do you think that Minneapolis has changed in the last few years, or is this whole thing surprised you? Did you see it coming, or it's just completely out of left field?
I'm a middle-aged white guy. I don't, the cops don't bother me. There's a cop every single day, and I do mean literally every single day at the grocery store I go to. I live in an area called Uptown. And there's always a cop there at night, just hanging out, just has a presence, which is what shocked me, the fact that I've seen no police anywhere in town the last 2 nights, because they're usually kind of somewhere, just to have a presence. So I don't think Minneapolis is the worst city in America when it comes to the police or race relations, but I don't know if that's saying much.
Right.
I've had a lot of people message me on Instagram today. One guy from Baltimore and a couple other cities that was surprised as well, because Minnesota usually has a reputation as being rather nice. Most people, if you're from out of the United States, probably know absolutely nothing about it. Prince was from here, and that's about it.
I remember you took a picture of one of the graffiti out there, and it said Minnesota nice and racist.
Well, Minnesota nice is sort of the how they always describe people, which is basically it's like a passive-aggressive nice, or they're nice to your face and they'll stab you in the back, and that's what Minnesota nice means.
So how's you dealing with the coronavirus then?
Honestly, it hasn't affected my life much at all, because when I'm not traveling, I don't ever go within a few blocks normally of where I live. So, I go to the store, I get some food, and I work in my apartment. And then the coronavirus hit, and I just kept doing exactly the same thing. So it hasn't been. I don't think it's been any different here than it really has anywhere else. The big difference is once it started to warm up. So this started in March. It was still pretty cold. Temperatures around freezing. Now it's pretty warm. There's a massive difference in what happens when it warms up here. Usually, once it hits about 60 degrees, it just kind of explodes in activity. And you just have hundreds of people that are eating outside on the sidewalk and getting out and walking and biking. It's a huge difference. And I started walking, trying to get, 10 to 20,000 steps in a day. And I live right next to 5 different lakes that I can walk around. And there's so many people out every day, especially when it gets really warm, that for all practical purposes, if you were out walking, you would never know that anything was going on.
Right. And you're expecting some less activity tonight because it's getting a little colder at the moment. And so the riots that happened during warm nights.
Yeah, and let me put that into context. So it was like 70 degrees last night, which is warm for, Minneapolis, and it's dipping down into the low 50s, maybe get down to 50 degrees tonight. So I think that'll dampen it a little. There's a curfew in place. The National Guard is out. They've already burned a lot what could be burned. So there's that. Before we started talking, I did watch some news. There was a protest going on in front of the police, but it mainly involved people, holding their hands up and kneeling, saying, "Don't shoot." It wasn't the destructive stuff that you've seen the last 2 nights. So I don't expect there to be any major fires or anything like that anymore.
So you think it's going to kind of die down after this, and things are just going to go into court and the whole proceedings regarding those police officers, those 4 police officers?
Only 2 of them have been indicted and put into custody. So I think there's certainly demand for the other 2, but at least doing that today, especially the main guy who kneeled on his neck, that will take a lot of the wind out of people's sails. And I think these things kind of tend to just burn out after a while. People have vented their anger. But,
right.
That'll be a short-term fix. But I do believe in the long run they're going to have to do something. Because the problem with policing in the U.S., this guy that killed him, he's had 18 complaints.
I thought it was 25, but yeah, you're probably right.
I heard 18, maybe it is. But this notion of, 18 strikes and you're out, just there's no other job on earth where you could do that. And, that's why police have this idea that they can get away with anything. I don't know if you're familiar with the phrase qualified immunity.
No.
It's a Supreme Court doctrine that came out regarding whether or not law enforcement officials can be held liable. And it's an insane doctrine that says unless there has been a court case where exactly the same thing has been done, a police officer cannot be held accountable for what they did. So let's say in this case, it goes to trial, goes to a jury, they convict him, they find him guilty. On appeal, they can say, well, he had qualified immunity because there's never been a case before of 2 cops holding a guy down and a 3rd cop kneeling on his neck where the guy died. So because that never happened before, there was no expectation that the police should think that it was wrong. Right? That's right. Insane, right? There's an infinite number of things that you could do that are wrong, and to say, well, okay, the first person to do it gets a free pass is crazy. So there's a court case that's coming before the court, I believe, in this term, that is going to deal with this issue of qualified immunity, and I think it's going to be really important to see what the court does, because it's one of those things that just does not make sense. It's like asset forfeiture, right, where the police can pull someone over, take their vehicle, and never charge them with a crime, and just take it. They can just take money and whatever, and it violates every sensibility, I think, that America was founded on. And it's crazy that there are state governments and local governments that encourage it, and they basically encourage it. So it's a way of getting revenue.
Did you ever feel afraid during all your walkabouts in your backyard there, which is the epicenter, effectively, of these riots?
Not really. No, not today. Not in the middle of the day. Not at all. There were lots of people walking around. I wasn't the only one with my phone out taking pictures of stuff.
None of the violence, it doesn't sound like any of the violence is directed toward other citizens, other people.
No,
sounds like it's...
To the best of my knowledge, and there could be something I just don't know about, no one has been hurt or attacked in any of this. At least not purposefully. Like I said, to the best of my knowledge. I don't think that was what it was about. Like I said, I did encounter this group of guys that were walking down the street and they were really boisterous, so I just sort of got off the street and took a side street. But that would have been about as dangerous. Everyone keeps telling me, oh, stay safe. I'm pretty far away from the epicenter of this. I'm not worried. The odds of something happening to me are...
One of your things, I think, one of your stories, I could see like you were filming smoke in the distance.
I was filming... No, I don't know if you saw all of them, but there was literally fire still in one of the burning buildings.
No, from your apartment building.
Oh, yeah, that was last night. And today I went and found out where the actual building was. But yeah, I could see smoke last night. That was about a mile from me.
Yeah.
There was another building, so I couldn't see it directly, but I could see the smoke that was going up.
Yeah. So your travel plans are still on hold, I imagine, along with the rest of the nation.
I have no plans right now. I don't know. I'm using this as an opportunity to do a lot of things. And one of it's, to just sort of restructure my whole business. I'm going to be planning some tours I may do one actually this year still, in the American Southwest, a tour of like national parks. I think that'll be, aimed at Americans who it may be difficult to travel internationally still for the rest of the year. So if we can do something in the U.S. that's outdoors, not indoors, that's something we might be able to pull off. And then planning stuff for the next 2 years, for 2021 and 2020, different destinations around the world.
Tell us about your amazing weight loss, Gary. Let's end it on a good note. And so this is a remarkable story.
I don't think it's that much remarkable than anyone else. I started traveling in 2007, and I traveled full-time for about 9 years. And so for over a decade, because even after I got a place, I kept eating in restaurants, right? You eat out all the time. And you can control what you order, but you can't really control how it's prepared or the ingredients that go in. And so I just ate like crap for a long time. I would go out and photograph, and you always want to maximize your time when you're out walking around before the sun sets. So I would just have fast food or something, and I gained a lot of weight over the last decade. And
how much weight did you gain? What was before you started, roughly?
I probably gained about 50, 60 pounds over 10 years.
From what weight to what weight?
I was probably about 215 pounds when I started, and I went up to like 275 at my peak.
Wow.
And
you're 6 feet tall or something?
A little under that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so, I just realized eventually you hit a point where it's like, all right, I got to do something about this. And so I eventually just started, I went on an extremely low carbohydrate diet.
Which is any particular name or is it?
Carnivore diet. I just eat meat.
Okay.
So
that's the name of the diet. It's called carnivore?
Yeah, basically it's just eating mainly beef, but organ meats, some seafood. It's nutritionally complete. Beef liver is the most nutrient-dense food there is, period. It has pretty much everything. But more importantly, I spent the last 2 years probably doing more research into nutrition than I did into travel. And what causes is fat, the creation of adipose tissue, is the hormone insulin. And that's why, so many type 2 diabetes has exploded in the United States, and that's basically because of blood sugar. And if you look at the amount of sugar that Americans consume, I think it went up from 4 pounds a year around the year 1900, and it's approximately 125 pounds a year today. But
that's like 26 times.
But sugar's in everything. Sugar, high fructose corn syrup, and a lot of that had to do with this notion of low fat is healthy, and this all came about because of really one guy in the 1950s who had this hypothesis that fat was damaging. And he kind of pushed this through. He got on all the important boards, and he got the United States government to adopt this policy of, the food pyramid. And it was right when they adopted the food pyramid when obesity started to shoot up, because when they started taking fat out of food, what did they replace it with? Sugar. That's right. Because of taste. You remember like Snackwell cookies? They're fat free. Everything's fat-free. Right. And it was also, so we've seen a dramatic increase in carbohydrates, primarily through sugar, refined grains. So normally when people had bread, it was not as refined and pure as the stuff we're consuming now. And then the third thing the big thing is seed oil. Crisco was the very first thing that was promoted as this, and the word Crisco came from cottonseed oil. So it was originally used as a byproduct of cotton, and it was used for machine lubrication. And then they realized it kind of looked like lard, so they began, Procter & Gamble, which was a soap company, began marketing it to housewives as the new modern alternative. And they basically donated a crapload of money to this small organization called the American Heart Association, which at the time was just a small group of cardiologists, to start promoting things on radio shows. And then all of a sudden, corn oil, canola oil, cottonseed oil, and all these different oils that... Have you ever been to a farmer's market and seen anyone sell artisanal corn oil?
No.
No, you can't, and you never will, because it's a highly industrialized process that requires filtering and removal of odors and all this stuff. And it can't be made by a farm. You've seen olive oil, I'm sure, across Europe, because it's very simple. You take olives, you smush it with a rock, the oil comes out, olive oil. That's really all there is. It's cold pressed. But no human being ever put this crap in their body before 100 years ago, and we went from never having ingested this as a species to this being the healthy alternative. And
hold on, but what about regarding healthy alternatives? What about deep leafy greens? Because it seems like few diets I've ever heard of a diet that doesn't like deep leafy greens. What about you?
It depends on what the leafy green is. But here's the other thing. Most of those are also things we never ate until recently. Broccoli didn't exist until the early 20th century. If you ever watch a James Bond film, at the beginning, the producer of the early James Bond films, and I think maybe his name is still on some of them, but the Sean Connery ones was Albert Broccoli. That's not a coincidence. His family literally invented broccoli. And it comes from the mustard seed plant, as does cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and a bunch of other things. They were, through crossbreeding and plant grafting and stuff like that. Things like spinach are really high in oxalates. Everyone says, oh, there's iron in it. Yeah, but it's not heme iron, which is basically the kind that humans can ingest. And if you look at the vegetables that are in it, like it'll have vitamin K1, but not vitamin K2. And vitamin K2 is what our body can really use, and it's easy, it's bioavailable. Vitamin K1, which is the kind found in plants, is not. Vitamin D3, which again comes from animal food and from your body produced in the skin, is what we really need. Vitamin D2, which comes from a lot of plants, is not readily bioavailable. There's no vitamin A in plants. Carrots, which are often talked about as being a source of vitamin A, really have beta-carotene, which is a provitamin, meaning our body can convert beta-carotene to vitamin A, but it does so at like a 3 to 5% conversion rate compared to regular vitamin A, which you could get if you just had beef liver or something like that. Vitamin B12 is only found in animal products, EPA, DHA, choline, carotene, taurine. There's a whole bunch of things that you can only get in animal products. And that's why, there's been a rash of videos in the last 2 years of vegans who are giving up veganism because of health reasons. Their hair falls out, they're having dental issues, they have, lack of mental clarity. So you can, and and you've probably met some of these people in Africa, like the Massa, who basically just in Kenya,
the Maasai,
who just eat. They're ranchers and they basically just eat meat. The Inuit in northern Canada and Alaska, who basically live on diets of only meat. So humans can do it. It can be nutritionally complete. Prior to the advent of agriculture, they have what's called nitrogen-15, which is a stable isotope. And the higher up the trophic chain you are, basically you see higher amounts of nitrogen-15. So plants have very low amounts of it. Herbivores that eat the plants have...
Sorry to interrupt you, but I hear a helicopter.
Yeah. Probably a news helicopter. There was one last night that was kind of hovering. In fact, just before we started, I stuck my head out the door just to see where they were. But this one's really kind of close. I wonder if they're just, because the curfew's there tonight, if they're just checking to see where people are gathering.
Right.
But, so anyways,
sorry, I interrupted you.
Nitrogen-15, yeah, so they can actually go back. And if they have a bone sample from an animal, they can tell whether it was a herbivore or a carnivore based on nitrogen-15 and a couple other stable isotope things. And they can do it pretty well. So and humans basically are at or above like a lion. So our diets are estimated were about 90 to 95% meat prior to the advent of agriculture. And we've even seen there's been a decrease of about 10% in Homo sapien brain size since the advent of agriculture. So agriculture did a lot of great things for us on a social level. It allowed us to store calories, which you really can't do. That's the big downside to hunter-gatherer lifestyles. But it also allowed advanced civilization and standing armies and kings and stuff like that. But from
science probably too.
Yes, all those things, because you can have a division of labor, which you can't do if everyone is involved in hunting and getting their own food. But grains were never really what humans ate, since humans were human. Going back about 2.5 million years, where you have the Homo genus first came about. Where you draw the line of modern humans, about 250,000 years ago. But most anthropologists view that where we diverged from other hominids and from other sapiens, like gorillas and chimpanzees, our closest relatives, is that we ate meat. We first scavenged it, and then when we learned to harness fire and later control fire. So the thought is that we would find fire from a lightning strike or something, and you would have a firebrand and carry it with you for as long as possible. And that allowed us to cook food. And the fundamental thing that separates us from other animals is our ability to cook. Every culture that they've ever found cooks food. And there was a lot of things that we could not eat, primarily plant foods that would otherwise be toxic, like cassava. I'm sure you've had cassava in your travels.
Of course.
Yeah, but you can't eat raw cassava. Right, you'll die.
Right.
But you really have to pound the crap out of it, cook the crap out of it to a point where it's then edible. So there were a lot of those foods that fire made edible. And what that ended up doing is it shortened our intestinal tract. So we have a much shorter gut because part of our digestive process is in cooking. And that's and the energy that we would otherwise go into having a large gut system like a gorilla would or a chimpanzee, we were allowed to shift that into our brains. And that's really what separates humans apart. We have tools and language and stuff like that. But I could talk about this all day long. But
I can see you've done a lot of
in terms of weight loss. Yeah, so I mean that's basically one. That was the big part of it. But then there was some other parts as well. So that was controlling insulin levels. Through the month of April, I haven't done it quite as much in May. I did some extended fasts as well. So once you become fat adapted, which means that you've transitioned your body from burning glucose primarily as its fuel source to fat. And there are two energy sources that our body can use, carbohydrates and fat. And it always wants to burn carbohydrates first because it needs to get it out of our blood. You can only have about a teaspoon worth of glucose in your blood, and the rest gets either turned to fat or it gets stored in your liver or your muscles. And you only have about 6 to 48 hours worth of glucose, but most people have a lot more fat. So once you stop consuming the carbohydrates, your body becomes accustomed to burning fats, you can shift from dietary fat to body fat really easy. And I found it just trivial I just stopped eating. So the first time I did it, it was by accident. I realized I forgot to eat one day. And I just let's keep going on this. And I went 4 days without food. I would then do a refeed, and then I did a 5-day fast. And I ended up doing a week-long fast. And it also kicks in a cellular process called autophagy. There's a fascinating case in the 1960s of a guy. His name was, he was Scottish. Oh, what the hell was his name? It was the longest fast ever recorded. He went 380 some days without eating. He went down from 450 pounds to like 180 pounds. But the amazing thing was, at the end of his fast, he had no loose skin. None. And if you've seen people who've done extreme weight loss, or if you watch like My 600-Pound Life, they'll often have a lot of loose skin. And the process of autophagy, the name literally means to self-eat. And your body, after about 48 hours of fasting, it kicks into this process where it's recycling dead skin cells or dead cells, and it is consuming things that it doesn't need, which is the opposite process of like growing extra skin when you gain weight for extra fat tissue. So it's the opposite of that. So and it's also a good way to just to clean up your body. So even if you don't want to lose weight, to occasionally do it like a couple day fast a few times a year is widely considered to be therapeutic. And it's something, that most major religions of the world always had as a part of their discipline. So cutting out carbohydrates, fasting, that obviously helps because you're just not eating anything. So changing the caloric content, reducing the caloric content. And then the other thing is I just walk. So I've been
But you used to walk a lot as a tourist.
I did. But now, so I bought.
And not only that, but you also had like the world's heaviest bag on your backpack with all your camera gear.
Yes. So I've had a Fitbit for a couple of years, and I think the record I ever did for a single day was 25,000 steps. And I remember I was in Vilnius the day I did that. And I was really tired at the end of that day. And now I am, like today, I did 22,000 steps. Didn't break a sweat.
Right.
In fact, I did a record. I did 46,000 steps a couple weeks ago. And I'm basically just sort of training myself. I saw Fitbit has different badges you can earn. And their top badge for a single day was 100,000 steps, which is approximately 50 miles, 85 kilometers. So I'm going to try to do that by the end of the summer. And basically, it's just wake up really early one day and walk. Just walk all day long. At the rate I can go, that's about
4 miles an hour.
16 hours it would take. That's assuming I don't stop. So if I start at 3 or 4 in the morning, I think I should have ample time. Especially if I can easily do 30,000 steps a day now. So it's really just one good day of doing it. And so I think I can do it. And I've been kind of doing lots of different routes from my house, so I have a plan for how I could do it. But really, at this point, it's just kind of getting the goal so that I can say I walked 50 miles in a day.
Oh, yes. You can definitely do it. And like you said, it's something that it's all about waking up early and not taking too many breaks and just walking at a steady 4 mile per hour pace. It's just math. You'll get it done. You might end up at like midnight when you're done, but that's all right.
And people said, "Oh, are you going to start walking or are you going to start jogging?" I'm like, no, I don't. There's not really that much benefit to it from an energy expenditure standpoint. So if I walk 10 miles, that's 20,000 steps. I think that's about 1,200 to 1,300 calories I would burn in addition to the approximately 2,200 an adult male at my weight would burn just by normal metabolic activity. So you figure there's about, I think, 3,300 calories in a pound of body fat. So you can burn an extra third of a pound of fat per day by doing that. So long story short, changing the calories, because a calorie is not a calorie. The metabolic and hormonal changes of eating, a teaspoonful of sugar is very different than eating a teaspoonful of fat or a teaspoonful of protein. So they're not the same. So I'm changing the quality of what I'm doing, changing the quantity of what I'm doing through intermittent fasting and extended fasting, and then also increasing my calorie expenditure, which is also, in addition to just burning calories and burning fat stores, you're also increasing muscle mass as well. And the other thing I'm going to probably start doing, so all the gyms have been closed, and the apartment I live in has a gym and a pool that I haven't been able to use the last couple months. I'm going to probably start doing some strength training as well, because that's something else. And the ultimate goal of all this is to lose enough weight so, one, no one recognizes me anymore if they meet me in person, and two, to be able to do some things that I probably couldn't have done at a higher weight, which is include things like if I wanted to hike the Camino de Santiago or climb Mount Kilimanjaro, or I've even in the back of my head, and I know you've done a lot of this, some of the longer hikes in the United States, that could be a possibility as well.
Yeah, well, there's the Ice Age Trail right there in Minnesota's backyard.
Yeah, it's in Wisconsin, and I've actually joined the Facebook group for that. It's not as well documented as something like the Pacific Coast or Crest Trail or the Appalachian Trail, where it's not as challenging. It's pretty flat. But as far as like where to stop and where to camp, there's not a lot that is written about it. It's approximately.
I should hook you up with a friend of mine. His name is Linton. He's done it, I believe, twice, maybe even 3 times. And he's also done the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide Trail. And I've actually hiked with him. He's a really hardcore hiker, and he knows a lot. But he's done the ice. He's like, I think, the Ice Age Trail ambassador. So I should hook you up with him so that you at least know about it, because that's a nice trail too. It's only 1,000. Not only
about 1,000 miles. Yeah, it does like an S-shaped curve through Wisconsin, and it follows basically the edge of the last glacier. So where it
doesn't go into Minnesota at all.
No, it starts right on the border of Minnesota on the St. Croix River, and then works its way up to Door County, which is the thumb if Wisconsin's a mitten. It works its way up there in a kind of a circuitous route. It's not direct. But yeah, when I research like the Pacific Crest Trail, there's so much like, oh, you can stay here and camp this night, and then you get your stuff shipped here, and it's all really specific. And there's none of that for the Ice Age Trail.
You might want to check out Gut Hook. I've never used his app, but it's GUT Hook, and he might have a like a cheat sheet, if you will, in the maps and as part of his app. Because the way it works is you download the app for free, and then you buy modules for it. So you buy the PCT module or the AT module, CDT module, and I wouldn't be surprised if he has a Ice Age Trail module. But that is a resource I've never used, but I know people have been raving about it as being very useful. As far as like where's the water, where's the campsites, where do you resupply, that kind of logistic stuff is important. So check out Gut Hook as a possibility. So how much do you weigh now, Gary?
About 220. So I'm almost down to where I was when before I started traveling, and my goal weight is to get to 175.
Oh wow! So you still got another 20.
I have not lost much in the last few weeks. I've because I did a lot of fasting. I sort of just I've just sort of been maintaining and refeeding. I'm pretty analytical about this, so I'm fasting, but you don't want it to become an eating disorder or something. Although I could probably use a good dose of eating disorder right now. Can you hear what's happening right now?
Yeah, I can hear some sirens or honking horns.
There's a lot of honking horns. I don't know where it's coming from. It's nonstop honking. So there's something's going on.
It reminds me a little bit of I know this is total non sequitur, but as far as the Oklahoma City bombing, Oklahoma is a place that everybody goes and thinks nothing will ever happen in Oklahoma. And then boom, that happened. And same thing with Minnesota. It seems like the least likely place in the United States to ever have any kind of major issues. And here you guys are front and center of national news with all this, the rioting and problems that you're having.
Yeah, I wouldn't have guessed it. I mean, to be completely honest, like if someone had said, "Oh, there was an incident with a cop," yeah, I could believe that. But the response is not at all what I expected.
Not Minnesota nice.
And I think, to be honest, a lot of it has to do with the nature of what happened. That it was filmed and it was so blatant and obvious. There was really no, he was just kneeling on the guy's neck, and there wasn't a whole lot of subtlety or nuance, or I haven't even, I read a lot of. That's getting much louder, and I thought I heard a gunshot. But there wasn't a lot of nuance in this. I visit on a daily basis websites on the political right and the political left. Nobody was defending this. Really, there wasn't. And sometimes you'll see, the pro-police, the pro-law and order people, and I haven't seen anything for this. Wow, hold on one second.
Okay, go ahead.
Holy shit.
So Gary's off to check his window. Are you on I wonder if he's on the second floor or what? But he can't hear me right now. But
no, I can hear you.
Okay.
So I'm on the 6th floor, the top floor of my building. There's a helicopter hovering very close to where I am, much closer than what it was last night, which is where it was over when the police station burned. And there are a lot of cars honking, and that appears to be coming. There's an interstate not far away, and I'm wondering if someone is doing a protest on the interstate and they've closed it off. That's my guess. I don't know yet. I haven't checked out the news. Wow. So, and it's nonstop honking. So
yeah, I can hear it. Loud and clear. Well, yeah, Minnesota never will be the same after that incident. They're going to have
now
to
I'm hearing
reform.
Shouting. Human voices. Fuck.
So how are you going to, I think also the coronavirus probably made people a little bit more edgier than normal.
I believe it's a contributing factor. I don't know how much it is, but the fact that everything's been shut down. And that just to a lot of, the small businesses that were hurt. That's just, this is all just on top of that. You got to remember.
I know. That's what I feel so much.
This is crazy.
For businesses.
Oh my God.
Yeah, crazy.
Well, yeah, I was going to talk to you anyhow about, because I know you've done a lot of long distance hiking, and this is something I was thinking about doing, and I think I'm getting close to a point where I could probably do a longer, hike at this point. So,
I think that's a great idea, and you just have to decide how much time you want to take. For example, there's have you heard of the Hayduke Trail? Hay and Duke. That's kind of a shorter trail. So El Camino Santiago is it's as long as you want it to be. It can be as little as 100 kilometers to as much as 1,000 or not 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 kilometers. I mean, people have walked from any distance.
This is getting closer to me. This is whoever's listening to this podcast. This is live happening out my window right now.
Well, I will publish it right away.
Wow.
So people.
No, once we're off the air, I'll find out more what's happening. But wow.
Yeah. Is it getting louder?
It's clearly a protest. I don't know where it's coming from or what street they're on.
Sometimes it's funny, I look at us and I think to ourselves, wow, we really are like primates. It comes very clear that we are kind of an ape in the sense that from a purely rational perspective, when you see an injustice like this, it's kind of like, an innocent person gets killed, and then all of a sudden I decide to then go burn down a building of another innocent person. I mean, it's just that seems like such an emotional primate like behavior, like a lizard brain, if you will. It doesn't, logically speaking, it's indefensible. You cannot explain that. At least I can't. Maybe you can.
Can you hear that now?
Yeah, of course I can hear loud and clear.
Yeah, like I said, this is not the first time in human history this has happened. It's not the last. There's been lots of different causes of riots. Are you familiar with the Civil War riots that happened, the draft riots in New York? And when you look back in our history, just American history, not even in war, across the world, Civil War riots were violent. It was partially, if you ever saw the movie The Gangs of New York, they had a scene where that happened, and they killed hundreds of people. So, yeah, it's one of those things that I think sociologists need to look at, and I think that the police need to consider this. You can't just indefinitely do whatever you want because you're the authority and expect no reaction.
Right. All right, Gary. Well, I'll let you figure out what's going on in your neighborhood there.
Yeah, this is going to go up. I'm going to do something on Instagram. I don't know if the video will show up, but at least the audio will. Yeah,
exactly. Well, remind everybody, Everything Everywhere is your handle pretty much most places.
Yeah, it's Everything Everywhere on Twitter, but just look for my name, Gary Arndt. I'm super easy to find online. Yeah. I'm on everything, so you can figure it out.
Wonderful. Hey, Gary, enjoy. I'm not going to say stay safe because I think you are safe. But I hope your community at least is able to process this tragedy in a healthy, rational way.
Me too, and I'm very curious to find out what is happening around me right now because it's getting loud.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you later then.
Okay. Thanks.
See ya. Okay, bye. All right. Well, I guess we should have done this live. Because that would have been cool. Yeah, like Instagram Live.
And that concludes this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel, technology, and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we talked about, or if you'd like to comment on the show, or if you'd like to ask me a question, then go to WanderLearn.com and click on this episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is the username I use on all social media. You can also get to my website by going to ftapon.com. And here's one last reason to remember Tapon. If you like what I do and would like to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ftapon. That's where you can pick up some remarkable rewards for as little as $2 a month. And now for 5 quick favors. Number 1, subscribe to the WanderLearn podcast. 2, download it. 3, share it. 4, review it somewhere. And 5, sign up for my newsletter at WanderLearn.com. Our theme music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.